Since we're all drinking and working from home these days, I thought I'd make a bar that conceals a hidden workspace. This project is my entry into the Rockler Desk Challenge, hosted by my podcast, the Modern Maker Podcast. I wanted a dark hardwood for the vertical slats, and walnut can be pretty pricey, so I went with Ipe deck boards from Advantage Lumber. I cut these 8-foot boards down to 6 feet and then ripped them on the table saw to strips 1¼ inches wide. Ipe is very hard and quite dense, so I made sure to use a fresh table saw blade for these rips. I then put a 1/4 inch roundover bit in my router table and rounded all the edges. I then got started on a whole bunch of sanding. I started with 100 grit and then worked my way up to 150. I used a bunch of microfiber rags to wipe off all the excess dust that had accumulated onto these strips, and then wipe down each piece with mineral spirits. This just helps remove some of the oil that can be on the surface of the wood. Once the mineral spirits had completely dried off, I then coated them with a layer of Ipe oil. This is a really dense oil that's designed to penetrate this extremely hard wood that's impregnated with a lot of oil already. I used a rag to wipe on a thick coat, let it sit for 10 minutes, and then used a clean rag to wipe off the excess. For the frame, I'm going to use angle steel, and it's going to involve a whole bunch of 45-degree cuts, and I'm going to do these with my angle grinder. The top cut on the flat part is pretty easy. You just draw the line and then follow it. The side cut is a little bit trickier because I want to cut through that wall at an angle as well. I'm going to weld these pieces together, but first I switched to a flap disc on my angle grinder and cleaned up the edges. Also, check out this nifty new clamp that I got from Garrett Wade. There's a link to it in the description box below. I used my adjustable angle Magswitch magnet clamp to hold the steel pieces in place while I welded them together. This has super strong magnets that you can turn on or off with a switch of the levers, and it's really handy for projects like this. The frame is made of 2 C-shaped pieces of welded steel. So I made the big C's and the small C's first, checked to make sure that they were even before welding them each to a straight piece in the middle. I want 2 of the angled frames to point up and the third one that the desk is going to be on to point down. I've gotten pretty good with an angle grinder, and this Magswitch clamp is really nice and precise, but I was still a little bit worried when I lined them up to see how well aligned they were. I was pleasantly surprised to see all the ends just within about 1/4 to 1/2 inch of each other. I took some scrap pieces of steel and used clamps to push them into perfect alignment, and then I went back in and reinforced the welds. You see, when I originally tacked these pieces together, I didn't go heavy. I just lightly tacked them in case my angles were off a little bit. That way I could still sort of bend them and force them into position before making them super strong with some nice heavy welds. I released the clamps and look at that, they barely even moved. Now I'm going to add in some vertical supports, and once again I'm going to use some Magswitch clamps along with some regular magnets, because without the wooden vertical slats to reinforce the structure, everything's a little bit wavy. So I'm still just going lights with these initial welds, just in case something gets a little bit off, I can kind of bend it right back into the correct location. I added some temporary supports just to make sure that the middle part was at the right height, and I also trimmed up some of the long ends on the cut pieces. I wanted to cut a piece of plate steel for the desktop, but one of these temporary supports got in the way, so, well, I guess that was all for nothing. I used a piece of scrap cardboard to trace the outline of the frame and then cut along these lines that I traced. I then used this as a guide for designing the desktop, which I'm going to cut out of 1/8 of an inch thick plate steel. I rounded over the sharp edges with a flap disc on my angle grinder. I used spring clamps to hold it in place and then welded it to the frame. Now the desktop went on top of the angle steel, but this footrest and support is going inside the angle steel. And the same goes for the top shelves as well. I was able to cut all 6 of these shelves and supports out of a single 4-foot by 4-foot sheet of plate steel. The structure was starting to get pretty heavy, and I was worried that moving it upright would result in some bending. So I added some permanent vertical supports using 1-inch angle steel. My heavy-duty Maker brand T-bar clamps came in handy for pulling the steel together so that the vertical supports fit perfectly. I want the wood slats to hang below the bottom of the steel frame by 3/4 of an inch, so I just placed it on some 3/4 inch thick pieces of plywood. I used my angle grinder with a wire brush to clean the steel thoroughly before starting to add the wood. I started installing the slats at the corners. Drilling holes through steel horizontally is a little bit tricky because you have to push really hard. But once I got through, I then used spring clamps to hold the slats in place, pre-drilled holes in the Ipe, and then attached the slats with 3/4 inch long pan head screws. I got a lot of holes to drill, so I decided to flip the whole structure on its side. This way I could drill holes while pushing down using gravity behind me. I kept adding corner pieces while keeping my fingers crossed and hoping that all the spaces in between would fill in evenly. Here we go, the first moment of truth. So I laid out all the slats and then I used popsicle sticks that are about 1/16 of an inch thick as spacers. Now because I rounded over the edges of these slats with the router, it's going to be hard to pick up visually little differences in the gap spacing. So I created flexibility by alternating between 2 popsicle sticks and 3. I slid the Ipe back so that I could mark the locations of the holes and then drill through the steel, but then I realized I could just use the popsicle sticks as guides and drill out the other side. Placing the structure on its side made it easier to drill the holes, but I did have to get underneath it to attach the slats. This part's going to take a while, so let me tell you about the sponsor for this video, Fubo TV. If you're one of the 80 million Americans who are fed up with paying high cable prices and dealing with shady cable companies, I get really annoyed when they never show up when they say they're going to and they give you this like 5-hour window. Annoying. There's finally an alternative though. And this gives you the cable TV experience at half the price and it's easy to sign up. It's called Fubo TV. Fubo TV comes with 100 of your favorite channels, including complete coverage of your favorite sports with all the local broadcasters. All major sports leagues networks is what we're talking about. NFL, Red Zone, ESPN, ABC, CBS, and more. Plus, you can record your favorite games and shows on Fubo TV's cloud DVR and watch them anywhere on any device. Other streaming services can't compete with the breadth of entertainment that comes with Fubo TV, especially at this price, which is again, half the cost of cable. Fubo TV is the best option for cord cutters everywhere. Fubo TV is easy to try. It takes just 2 minutes to sign up and to start streaming all your favorite cable channels. No cable box required. You don't have to get this equipment that later you have to send back to them and all that kind of nonsense. You can just try it for free and cancel anytime, no hassles, no glitches, no gotchas. So sign up for a risk-free 7-day trial of Fubo TV and get 15% off your first month by going to FuboTV.com/homemademodern. That's FuboTV.com/homemademodern, or just click on the link in the description box below and you'll get your free trial and 15% off your first month of Fubo TV. So once again, FuboTV.com/homemademodern, or click on the link in the description box below. All right, back to the build. I had calculated the distance relative to the slat width, but I knew there'd be 1 or 2 places where I was a little bit off. So I cut a couple slats that were 1/8 of an inch thinner and a couple more that were 1/8 of an inch thicker. And sure enough, here's the place where I'm using the slightly thicker one. But what's weird, it's really hard to tell when you see the whole thing at a distance. Ipe is pretty dark in color, so that's why I thought raw steel would look good with it. But if I was going to use a lighter colored wood, and I think plywood slats would be a great way to do a less expensive version of this project, I would probably paint the steel white. Now I want this whole thing to roll so that you can spin it around, but I didn't want to use casters that would push it too high up off the ground. So I got these really cool ball bearing casters from McMaster Carr, and I just drilled holes through the steel frame and then bolted them on. Now it's ready to go as a desk and room divider, but I want a shelf on the other side to hold some liquor because I really like that mullet desk idea where it's party in the front and business in the rear. So I cut a shelf out of plate steel and then cut some angle to wrap around and give it a thicker perimeter. I welded the pieces together, and for this last piece, I had notched out a piece of the angle steel so I could kind of bend the flanges down and get a nice, clean, continuous perimeter. I do all my welding with my Forney Easy Welder. It's affordably priced and is powerful enough for both my furniture projects and for my container house builds. Now I don't want to drill holes and screw to the slats themselves, so I'm going to put bolts between the spaces in the slats, and it's going to connect to some small pieces of angle steel on the back side. And as with all my angle steel, I wire brushed it to give it a nice dull finish. I then placed the shelf into the cavity and marked the locations of where the spaces in the slats were so that I could drill holes for the bolts. With this system, I can make multiple shelves on the bar side without drilling through the wood itself. To finish the steel, I first cleaned it with mineral spirits, and then I applied some Maker brand Simple Finish. Simple Finish works on both wood and steel, and you just wipe it on, let it sit for about 10 minutes, and then wipe off the excess. One of my welded on vertical supports wasn't perfectly straight, so I just made a little wood and steel covering that I can use as a plate for magnets to kind of hold other hooks and little clips for notes and stuff to myself. I also screwed magnets to one of the wood slats so that I could make a little fence that would keep the liquor bottles from moving when I rotated the whole structure. Rare earth magnets are super strong, and I made this handy little clip that goes to the underside of the small desk where I can hang my backpack. I'm going to use the upper shelves for books and camera equipment, and the small desktop will be used for my everyday items like pocket knives, sketchbooks, and such. I love this project for multiple reasons. Yes, the bar work combo is kind of cool and novel, but what I think is really functional about it is the ability to work in your living room, but then if you have guests come over later, you can hide your whole work area simply by rotating the thing and pushing it against the wall. So this was my entry to the Rockler Desk Challenge. Now this is the 4th challenge that we've hosted at the Modern Maker podcast. And let's head over to the studio where I'll tell you a little bit more about it. This project was part of the challenge that my podcast, the Modern Maker podcast, puts on. This is our 4th challenge now. The other challenges we did were first the 2 2x4 challenge, then we did the 1 sheet of plywood challenge. Those were both material based. Then we moved on to the bent wood challenge, which was technique focused. And for this one, the Rockler Desk Challenge, we were just thinking, since a lot of people are working from home now, that having a whole bunch of DIY or woodworking projects that showed clever workstations just might be a good and helpful thing. So it doesn't mean you have to build a traditional desk. It just means we want to see creativity and makers do their thing around the idea of what it means to have a workstation in your home. Could also be outside, who knows? Get creative with it. So if you want to see the current entries to this very informal, more of a challenge than a competition, just go on Instagram and look at the hashtag Rockler Desk Challenge. Thanks to Rockler for putting on these challenges. They're a lot of fun. It's a great way to share ideas, and it's really helped a lot of content creators on the maker side get their first big break. A lot of the videos that ended up on YouTube from the previous challenges have really gotten a lot of views. So look around for the Rockler challenges. There's a whole back catalog of really awesome work. And thanks for watching this video. And so until next time, bye.